Welcome back, everyone, to the second season of the Artist to Storyteller speaker series. My name is Steph Hankinson, and I'm the Humanities and Drama faculty at South Seattle College. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderators for today's conversation with Zeke Peña, a Xicano storyteller and cartoonist from El Paso, Texas. So before I tell you more about Zeke's work and introduce Amico and Fenny, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement to set our intention and our energy before we become too immersed in conversation. We would like to acknowledge that the Artist to Storyteller project is located in West Seattle, the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Members of our team were born and raised on the traditional lands of the Suquamish, S'Klallam, Chumash, Tongva, Shawnee, and Kickapoo tribes. And we would like to honor the stewardship of these indigenous peoples whose land and stories we now have the privilege of having been shaped by. Thank you. So a little bit about the Artist to Storyteller series. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. It's a series that's fueled by the desire to put BIPOC artists, performers, and activists directly into conversation with students and the community to create a new space for human connection and celebrate creativity in all its forms. Last year, we welcomed a hand-poke tattoo artist, a photographer, a visual artist, performance artists of all stripes, and this season is going to be similarly exciting. And I'm thrilled to have Zeke Peña here today, kicking off our season dedicated to conversations about return and what that means for the arts in the broadest sense. One of the things that, I won't say too much, the conversation is going to lean a lot on this idea of return after we learn a little bit about Zeke's work, but it just feels really good to be back in this space with all of you and to return to these conversations as we continue through understanding what life is going to be like as we move through the pandemic. So thanks for being here. Let's see. So first, our student moderator, Fenny. Nocton Fenny is not only a graphic designer, but also a digital art student in South Seattle College. She specializes in branding, packaging, and web layout. However, she currently focuses on illustrations. Fenny's gotten inspiration from YouTube, Netflix, Instagram, and Pinterest every day and sketches a little bit as a diary. Most of her designs are strongly reflected by Asian culture, especially Vietnam. Fenny, welcome. How's it going?
Hi, thank you. Everything good.
We're so glad you're here. Full disclosure, Fenny and I worked together in a class a few quarters ago. I'm so pumped that you were able to join us.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. And our faculty co-moderator is Amico Matsuo. And Amico is an artist and an educator whose work focuses on transmigration, cultural exchange, and translation. Her most recent installations explore place, identity, and materiality in the fire-prone landscapes of the Anthropocene using ceramics, ash, and Phos-Chek flame retardant. Hey, Amico.
Hi there.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to be here.
Very good. And last but certainly not least, I'd love to introduce our wonderful guest artist, Zeke Peña. Zeke Peña is a Xicano storyteller and cartoonist from El Paso, Texas. He makes comic and visual narratives that reclaim stories and remix history. His work is a mashup of political cartoon, what is this word?
Rasquache.
Rasquache. I'm hoping to learn about that today. I realized I didn't know what it was and I didn't want to get it wrong. Rasquache. Cool. I'm going to ask a question about that later. And hip hop culture that addresses universal themes of identity, politics, ecology, and social justice. He received a degree in art history from the University of Texas at Austin and is self-taught in the studio. He's received awards for his book illustrations and his work in several American and Xicano art collections. Zeke is currently working on River Stories, an ongoing series of short stories about river, border, and the people of Paso Del Norte region. In this work, he offers up the question, what is your your and your family's relationship with the river. So Zeke, this is so exciting. I got a chance to look at some of the art that you're going to share with us, and I can't wait to learn more. I'm also not going to hold it against you that you went to UT. My family all the way back went to OU, and so we'll just have to like agree to disagree on football.
We'll get by. Yeah, we'll get by. We'll be good.
Right.
I'm not that like, super
Okay, thank God. So we're not going to have
we're
any.
good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
good.
so Zeke, welcome. And then I'm going to turn this over to Amiko and Finney. And for all the guests that are tuning in, please just go ahead and add any questions that you have throughout the event into the Q&A. I'll be moderating that chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the conversation. So if you have questions along the way, type them in the chat. Thanks, folks.
Okay, so I think we're going to start by having Zeke, if you could share a few images and share with us some of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I do want to take just a second to introduce myself. I am Zeke Peña. I'm Xicano. My mother's family is from southern New Mexico in a small farming community called San Isidro. My father's family is from Texas by way of Coahuila and Durango. And I was born in southern New Mexico and raised in El Paso, Texas. Thank you so much for the introduction, Steph. Thank you, Amiko, and thank you, Fenny, for having me here. I'm really excited to share a little bit about my work. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have quite a few images. I may go kind of quick through this, but let's see what we get here. So, okay, does this look okay, Amiko? Okay, great. Yeah, so in the studio, I'm going to talk kind of about, I kind of break my work up into two bodies of work, really, at this point. This is kind of a new thing that I've become aware of in my work. And I'm trying to, I guess, be a little more intentional about it. But what you're looking at here in this slide is, because I was trained as an art historian, I'm not formally trained as an illustrator, as a painter. I worked in film. I'm not formally trained in any of that stuff, and definitely not formally trained in book making or book illustration, which is primarily what my practice is centered around right now. But because I have a degree in art history, a lot of my work is focused on research, right? Coming from that methodology of research and archival research, things like that. Also a lot of work in oral histories, talking with family, recording family interviews, and then also carrying that practice over to the community. So what you're looking at here is I'm working on this short narrative called A Nomad's Heart. It's a short comic, and this comic was about home. And so what you're seeing are me looking through family photos to answer this question of what home was, which was actually a really kind of difficult question for me when I started to think about it, because my family comes from many places and we've moved many times, and also the complicated and problematic relationship that my family's history has with the international boundary of the border between the United States, what we call the United States and Mexico today. So that's a little snapshot, excuse me, of my workspace. A lot of photos. I sketch always on pencil and paper and kind of just go from there. There's also a lot of writing that's involved. Give me one second. So I wanted to read this really quickly, and it's about my practice, this part of my practice. For me, being a storyteller and a cartoonist is about being in a serve role. I don't know the solution to many of the problems or issues that affect my community, but I can create intentional and long-term relationships with people who have the experience, knowledge, and cultural background that do. I try my best to make myself available to my community and provide a service to support the initiatives they've identified. In most of the community work I've done over the years, someone has asked me to do it. And I would like to pose this question for folks in the audience who also practice whatever your practice may be, is what skills do you have and what communities or people could you partner with that could benefit from them? So my work in El Paso in the community is long time running. I've worked with many organizations, and I have I can create images and I can work with text and graphic design, with messaging. And so those are kind of the skills that I think serve as the greatest asset to my community. So those are the skills that I try to like make available to people. So what you're looking at here are just some projects. This was to address some of the racism that was going on in the independent school district, El Paso Independent School District there in El Paso, and the way that the funds were being unevenly dispersed to communities like Barrio Chamizal. You'll see here on the left another image from a similar campaign around the access to the schools in the community for Familias Unidas del Chamizal. On the right, Dignidad Literaria. So this is a literary campaign about representation for people of color in the literary and publishing industry. But the project I'll focus on a little bit is a project that I recently finished. I want to be sure to show y'all. I just got these in the mail, so I'm super excited about them. They're half-page zines. And so it's a full color zine. I won't read all through this for time's sake, but this project was a Farm Bill project. Excuse me, it was an informational project about the Farm Bill that was initiated by La Semilla Food Center in Anthony, New Mexico, which is in southern New Mexico. And it was co-written by Ruby Santos Orozco and V. Quevedo, and illustrated by myself, translated by Stephanie Macias Frescas. And so this project is a community project, a narrative project that is basically just trying to help our community understand a little bit better how the Farm Bill has an impact on our community and our food system there in El Paso. I'm gonna go through some of the images. So it's kind of historical, right? Like a lot of it, this project took about 2 years or a little over 2 years, working intermittently between other projects. But because there was a lot of history involved with it, once we started to dive into the history, it just required a lot of unpacking, right? It required a lot of discussion, conversation with how to address some of these issues and how to put the Farm Bill into context as it relates to the people of our region. And so, naturally with all things related to American history, it requires the unpacking of many, systems that are currently in place, right? And the histories that are involved with those. For example, with the food system, specifically, chattel slavery and its connection to the food system. And then as it kind of translates and morphs into the, industrial food system that we know today. As well as, the indigenous people of our region there and the displacement of the indigenous people. And, how, the food that we eat today is still directly connected to those indigenous folks. And so this project was also a community effort. We reached out to several people in the community to provide input, insight, feedback, right? Specifically the people of Isleta del Sur Pueblo, these are Tiwa people, and, providing their feedback on, what their experience is like for them historically and their people as it relates to these issues of food and land and access to water. So I'll kind of go through these, and it is a 48-page colored zine. If you'd like more information, you can find that at lasemillafoodcenter.org. Yeah. So some of the other projects that I've worked on are directly collaborating with people in my community. And so Andrea Everett is a Tiwa from Isleta del Sur Pueblo that I just mentioned. And Andrea is doing some excellent work, scientific research. I don't fully comprehend, honestly, exactly what Andrea does, the nuances of it, but it's essentially tracking the, the history of the river and our river, and how it's been affected, how it's detrimentally, the changes to the river based on border infrastructure, industrialization, mismanagement, all of these things, and how it's detrimentally affected the Pueblo's relationship to the river and their culture and ceremony that they practice with the river, as well as practical things like drinking water, right? And so Andrea's doing scientific research on that, tracking these changes in specifically in the region that is next to the pueblo of the river, and kind of analyzing what's going on there. And so my part of the collaboration was Andrea reached out to me to provide some visual illustrations for the research that Andrea is doing. And for me, this is exactly the type of work that I like to do when working with community, right? Is, someone has a need and asks me to do something, right? And if I have the right skill set to be able to provide that, I like to take that on. So see, these are some of the sketches that I'm continuing to work on. This is ongoing work. And these sketches are based off of photos from Andrea of the river. This is another sketch. And then you can see something that's closer to what would be a final illustration. Basically just meant to provide, to accompany the research, to accompany the information that Andrea is gathering. And I guess, also just provide another way of engagement, right, for this research. So those are some examples of some of the community work that I do. I also want to, shift. I talked about these kind of two modes of work that I work in. The other one would be my studio work, right? I also work on projects that I have a more personal connection with. I also see it as my responsibility to understand my own relationship to the place I'm living in, with the issues I address in my work and with the issues I address in my work. And so River Stories, the project that Steph mentioned earlier that I'm currently working on, is meant to reclaim, reconnect, and remix our shared history with the sacred river. So River Stories is an ongoing project. I forget the year that I started doing this. I've been doing work and research around the river for a long time. But I believe it was in 2019 that I published the first set of these stories. And a lot of them are based on oral histories. So it's conversation with people in the community, like Andrea, like friends, also conversations with my own family. I mentioned that, I'll discuss that here in a little bit. But it's really at the heart of it, I think, looking at the river and how the border has had effect on the river, right? I think that a lot of my work up to this point was really focused on the border and looking at the history of the border. And so after making this connection with the water again, both personally and like spiritually and just like entirely in my practice, was this realization that looking at the history of the border is always going to lead to the same places, right? It's going to lead to environmental racism. It's going to lead to mismanagement. It's going to lead to all the same places. But looking at the river and also looking at my own family, it was a realization that, there was story there, that the river was literally holding the history of our community and has been holding the history of many of the communities, specifically the indigenous people of this region, for generations, right? And it was also to try to make this separation between the river that I grew up with. The river that I grew up with looks like it does right here on the right. That's a fairly recent photo of the river between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. And then on the left is the headwaters in Colorado. And this work is specifically targeted on this kind of axiom, right? Which is the river and the border are not the same things. They're two different things. And it's taken me some time to really understand that. And so at the heart of this work is kind of trying to better understand what that means. So I'll go kind of quickly through these slides. These are some early iterations of this work around the river, an exhibit at the Rubin Center for Visual Art. These were drawings on the wall containing some of the history and some of the statistics that I was finding in the research. This is a presentation with a science class from Bowie High School, another partnership with a friend that was a science teacher at the high school, presenting some of this information to them, having discussion, making drawings, talking to them about what their experience has been like and what their perception of the river is. And then also having them visualize, right? And imagine if you could change things about the river, if you could change things about the space that we live in, what would you change and what would it look like? So these are some of the sketches from the students at Bowie High School. And in the research, I found really amazing things, right? People continue to swim in the river, but it becomes harder. Clearly, people continue to cross on the river, right, out of necessity. But this video from 1974 was footage of people swimming in the river. And that was something that was really stark to me. It really stood out to me because that definitely wasn't something that I experienced growing up. Here's a more recent shot of folks swimming in the river, some young people. This is the American Dam you see on the left, which is the literal boundary marker on the river. It's where the international boundary intersects with the river and where the river begins to be the line of demarcation of the international boundary all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the conversations, this is Rick Quesada from the Isla Pueblo. Isla del Sur Pueblo, Tiwa, and the border has been instrumental to our religious calendar and spiritual connection to the river. So having these discussions and conversations, and then making illustrations and comics based off of these stories, and these are kind of untranslated, narrations. These are Rick's words with the illustrations that I provided. This is Casandra el Exótico, a luchador from Ciudad Juárez. So this is, ese río siempre era la dualidad de las dos ciudades. El río siempre nos conectaba. So the river was always the duality of the two cities. The river has always connected us. And then the corresponding illustration to that. These are just excerpts. I'm just showing excerpts. You can read more of these on my website. They're free and open to the public. And it's an ongoing thing, so I'm always publishing. So really quickly, just to wrap up some of the stuff that I'm focused on currently. Again, going back to this family research. So where I'm really focused at right now is really trying to better understand my family's history as it relates to the river and as it relates to the region and the land. And these are some family photos from both sides of my family. On the left, my mother's family in the farming community of San Isidro. And then on the right, this is my great-grandmother on my dad's side. They worked as farm workers between the valley and Texas, and they would travel all the way up to Michigan when it was harvesting season. Some sketches based off of some other photos. This was actually one of the initial River Stories comics, just a little excerpt. And through this research, I mean, it's personal work, right? Like looking in the archives at the University of Texas, El Paso in the special collections and finding, learning my family history just by working on this project and better understanding when it was that my 4 times great-grandfather crossed into the territory, into the region, which at the time was still Mexico. The movement of the river and as it changes and how that changes history. It's a blank slide there. Sorry about that. And then some of the illustrations, based off of this, some of the comics telling this history, the crossing of the line, right? The idea of we didn't, on my mom's side of the family, it's one way. On my dad's side of the family, it's another way. But on my mom's side, it's, we didn't cross the border, but the border literally crossed where my family is from and where my family lived after the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And then some archival research. So I'm going to skip through quite a bit just so we can stay on track. This is a very, very recent illustration that I worked on during a residency at the University of New Mexico, and color illustration that is from these narratives about my family in southern New Mexico and the relationship with the river. Just again, that's what the work's about, illustration. I'll skip over this, but yeah, just fun. Also trying to speculate and think about different histories and parallel universes in which maybe some of the conquistadors never made it across the river, and what would that look like? Working on augmenting this work and bringing another element to it. So I'm still kind of in developmental stages of augmenting this, bringing it into virtual reality space. It's a collaboration with Augment El Paso, a longtime collaborator with that work, and just trying to bring sound and movement into the work, getting it a little closer to animation. And then, yeah, just to end, some of the narratives that I'm working on right now are also speculative fiction. They're science fiction based on the region, speculating on future scenarios. And these are some of the illustrations that I've been working on. And this is the most recent one. I won't go too much into detail on it because I'll talk for another 20 minutes. But I'll just let y'all look at it. You all are the first people to look at this in its entirety. I've only posted a clipping of it on Instagram, and so this is the full image. Yeah, and if you want, just really quickly, before I wrap up, if y'all want to see more of my work, Instagram and Twitter, you can find me there. Okay, so let me stop sharing. Okay, yeah, so thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think we're going to start with Fenny, Fenny, who has prepared some questions for you. So maybe we'll go back and forth and just see how it goes.
Excellent.
Thank you, Amico. So I have some questions for you. I really want to ask you about this because I read your blog, like one of your blog that you say daily you usually spend your time practicing sketching, drawing in your studio. So is it your real life? Is it your artistic life is lonely like this? And what do you do to counteract it? Please let me know.
Yeah, like the loneliness in the studio. Yeah, like how do I work around that? So I'm grateful to be in collaboration with many people all of the time. I think that really helps. A lot of the projects that I work on are collaborative, right? And if I'm being honest, and to go to the topic of what we're just, the return, right? And returning to work is that, during the pandemic, I was working on this project all the way through, before and through the pandemic. And it was a really important project for me to be working on. It was very meaningful and grounding to be able to be in conversation with people that I respect, with people that I love, right, and appreciate. And so I think that having a place to put that energy and having those conversations was really uplifting in the time when it was really difficult to be joyful. And then I think, being in the studio, I've worked at home before. I'm fortunate to have a separate studio space. And so I think working in the studio space where there's other people moving around is something that I really kind of appreciate. But yeah, I think that's that's kind of how I stay balanced. I also have been trying to practice be a little bit better about having a personal life and work-life balance. Knowing that sometimes me trying to fix a drawing or trying to fix a painting or a project or something for an hour or two and changing things and I keep on changing things. Sometimes that's not as effective or healthy for that matter, than maybe just taking a break. And sometimes what you need to do is to step away from the work. And so I think going for a walk outside or trying to remember that, drawing for me, drawing is at the center of my practice. Drawing is a performative act, right? Like we're using our bodies to create something, like many of the mediums, right? Yeah. And so I need to also take care of my body in that way, in my mind and my mental health, to be able to practice what I want to practice. So yeah.
Thank you. And one more of our questions is like, how's your background reflect in your artwork? Because I know I see your artwork really strongly reflect from your family side. So how is the inflect to your artwork, please?
Yeah. I think now it's more than ever, right? I think now I'm very, well, let me say this. When I was younger, I don't think it was so much the case for several reasons, right? Um, you know, coming from where I come from, but I think it's also an experience that many people share, which is like knowing where home is at, right? And as I mentioned early on in the presentation, talking about researching where home is, and me asking myself that question really like kind of opened my eyes, like, oh, whoa, like I kind of, there's not a very clear answer to that. And so I think when I was younger and earlier in my practice, it was very much um, being in the mode of experimentation and experimenting with styles and experimenting with different topics and different things. And I think now I am trying to be very intentional about knowing when I'm the right person to be able to work on a project. I think that's a really important question that I wasn't always asking early on, was am I the right person to work on this? Is it okay for me to be in this space? Is it okay for me to be talking about these things? Do I have personal connection and a personal relationship to these issues that I'm working on? And it wasn't always the case. I made a lot of problematic work for being in a space or making work about something that I shouldn't have been making work about. And but now I am focused on my family because I've realized that it's a very there's a lot there for me to make work about, right? Is me understanding my own family's relationship, because it does connect to these bigger issues that I was making work about, but it just relates to them in a different way. And I think before I was more concerned about the bigger issue. I was concerned about, immigration or the border or these really big issues. But there's another way to approach it, and it's with the personal and the specific, right? And so I'm really trying to be intentional about being personal and specific with the work that I'm making, at least in the studio, at least in my personal work. So yeah, to answer your question shortly, it's everything to me. It's where I'm coming from, and the people that I come from and the place that I come from is it should be very present in my work. I feel like it should be very present, and I try to be intentional about that. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Fanny, because that also mirrors some of what I was imagining with your broad range of projects that you worked on. We've looked at your children's book illustrations and your posters and work with various nonprofits and community murals. And so my question had to do with like a through line that you noticed throughout the work. And it sounds to me like right now you're focusing on that personal and specific approach rather than like a specific theme or something like that. I wonder if we can pivot for a little bit. And since I've been sharing this with my class a little bit, I was looking at this work in your approach to working on photographic. It's about the life of Graciela Iturbide. For the audience, she is a photographer. And to me, this work is really very much about like focusing how she pushes beyond what she already knows and readily sees. And the reason why I wanted to talk with you a little bit about this is because to me, it seems like that's kind of what you do, where you illustrate things that are sometimes hard to get at. And I'm wondering, like, for example, with this work, her work is photographic surreal, which means that she's sidestepping conscious processes, right? And she's making these sort of dream states visible through her photographs. And that seems like an inherently really difficult project. And yeah, that's kind of an open-ended question about like your approach to working on these difficult, hard to capture ideas and then making that visual for us.
Yeah. I also want to, it was written by Isabel Quintero. I got to give a shout out to Isabel, who is the author of that and also author of the other children's book that I illustrated, My Papi Has a Motorcycle. It's right behind me right there. But yeah, I mean, for Graciela's process, Isabel was the one that did. I have to give all the credit to Isabel for that book. Isabel did most of all of the research, I should say, with regard to Graciela's life, Graciela's process, right? But I think I can't, I obviously can't speak to her process. I can see it from the outside as, is that I see Graciela as being, and I'm looking at some of the illustrations on the wall that's helping me, trying to be open, right? Like it's very much about the conversation that she's having with people, and then being mindful and aware of the moment that she's trying to capture, being open and like kind of paying attention, right? I think that's something that I'm always trying to do, is like just paying attention. I think of Graciela's photograph, Nuestra Señora de las Iguanas, which is Our Lady of the Iguanas. And in the research, we found this contact sheet that had several of the outtakes of the photos from the film, right? Graciela was working on film, so there's several takes, right? Several shots. On the contact sheet in medium format, you would typically get a large contact sheet with many images. And it had many of those images. And you could almost, like in looking at those images, it was something that I had never seen before in looking at the single image that we all know and the photo that we all know, which is there was laughter there. You could almost imagine the conversation that they were having, that Graciela was having a conversation with this woman, Soybeda. And they were laughing and doing, and the way I imagined it, because I primarily, when I was younger, I worked as a photographer. I shot on my dad's Olympus OM1. And so photography and film for me has been really critical for understanding framing, lighting, things like that. And as a photographer, I looked at that contact sheet and I realized that what Graciela was doing, or at least from my perspective, was getting the woman she was talking to be comfortable. And you could see it like in the images, once she got comfortable and relaxed, the smile let go and there was just this neutral kind of pose. And that's the snap that Graciela took. And that's the photograph, the iconic photograph that we all know. So I think, for me, equally, if I'm drawing a parallel, it would just be that, paying attention and listening, right? So if I'm in collaboration with someone working on a project like the, La Semilla Farm Bill project, it's about being in conversation, listening to what the need is, what the intention is for the image. If it's working on photographic, it's listening in a way to Graciela. And when I specifically was working on that book, I was very intent, because I'm an art historian. Like if I had started doing research, I would have just gone off the deep end into archival research and books and like all this stuff. And I told Isabel up front, I was like, I'm not going to do that, because I know what I'll do. I'll go into this deep research. So I made this intentional decision to only understand Graciela as I feel like Graciela would want people to understand her, which is through her photographs. So I only looked at photographs and I only looked at images, and in a way just kind of tried to understand the visual story that Graciela was telling about herself by way of photographing other people and other places. And that's what I walked away with, was like being open to that, like listening to what Graciela was saying, listening to what Graciela was saying, in the images and in the photographs. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because we've been talking a lot about how artists create challenges for themselves to like heighten their awareness, like exactly what you're talking about, how we notice things. We tried like a Linda Berry activity and Corey DeKent's like, viewfinder activity and sketch notes and all that. I'm wondering if you can share with us any drawing like rituals you might have for yourself, or like obviously we saw your sketches that you do. You start with graphite before you continue working on it.
Yeah, I have so many of them. Always pencil on paper. For whatever reason, I draw so much better on newsprint paper. I don't know why. I think maybe because it's like a temporary medium. It's like temporary paper. Also, just like the feel of it, like it reminds me of like reading, newspaper cartoons when I was a kid, and like just the feel of the newsprint. And color pencil or like a graphite pencil are some of my favorite things. Drawing with ballpoint pen, because for years in school I was just drawing in ballpoint pen. But I think the one that stands out to me always, that I'll bring up like in classes and stuff or workshops, is that I made it around 2017. I was living in San Antonio, and I was assisting the painter Vincent Valdez from San Antonio in his studio. And at the time, it was the first time I ever had a dedicated studio. And so I made a commitment to draw at least one thing every day. And I was kind of just retraining myself how to draw, because over the years, I had developed a lot of bad habits, right? Like like trying to draw this way, or trying to draw like this person, or trying to draw like this technique over here. I had accumulated a lot of really bad habits, or what I perceived as bad habits. And so I just drew something every day and kind of was working on that. But I think, the habits that I try to create are also like being in my body, taking care of my body, stretching, like the kind of the obvious ones, like you're using your hand should feel good when you're drawing. If it's feeling bad, maybe it's not the best way to draw. And then, I don't know, I can't come up with anything else. I think those are the ones that really stand out, and I would say being connected and being loose, right? If I'm the most effortless drawings tend to be the drawings that I like the most, just for whatever reason, and they tend to go easier. So I'm always trying to remind myself to try to have ease when I'm drawing, and try not to force it too much. I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes I just forget to breathe.
Yes.
So that, but I think I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll probably open it up for the audience. I'm sure they have a lot of questions too. But I did want to make sure I get through one question, because I promised my daughter we've been reading your book again.
Yes.
And so I think like part of my question is about, in what ways are you engaging and connecting with the youth? Because I know that's important to you. And how does that show up in your work? I have just wanted to mention again, as we read this last night, that you present some pretty nuanced perspectives to share with children, young children. And I think that's very much a gift, and would love for you to speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thanks for reading the book. Shout out to your daughter for liking the book. I would say, to answer your question about the ways that I, kind of engage with youth, it's at the center of my practice also. My mother is a longtime educator, a lifetime educator, worked on every level of education you could probably think of. And so it's a big part of who I am. And, if we're talking about the issues that we're dealing with right now, I mean, the folks that we have to engage with are our young people, right? Like, and I think that they have a lot of answers. They have a lot of nuance. They have a lot of different ways of engaging with issues that I'm very interested in. Something, that I try to be pretty mindful of is not oversimplifying, or not, dumbing anything down, and just stating it clearly and directly. And working on the Farm Bill zine, it was something that, the authors and I, the group that worked on this, the collaborative group that worked on this, we were really intentional about that. Like, this is for young people. We're making this for young people from a pretty wide range of age. And so, I think putting that at the center of it, I work, most of my work functions on the principle that if a young person can, understand it and comprehend it, then anyone can understand it and comprehend it. And, what's better than that? But I think, but I'm also like, yeah, like I think of my nephews all the time, my nieces and my nephews, and I'm like, they're like with their phones on YouTube, like they're doing some super advanced stuff, like with hand-eye coordinate, like there's all kinds of stuff going on. So I'm also just interested in just making work that anyone can access, right? Like just making it generally accessible to whatever age, and that I make my work from that place. Now, obviously, if there's an issue that is, I can't, if there's an issue that's not appropriate or something, obviously you have to treat it with care and put it into context, and provide, just good context for something and deal with it with a good amount of responsibility. But for the most part, yeah, my work is for young folks and young-minded folks alike.
Well, thank you for that. I also wanted to mention that, like your storytelling is also like, sure, it's like all wrapped up in our identities and our histories, and especially ones that are harder to encounter, but also that you're telling stories about our non-human counterparts is also something that I wanted to say thank you to. So what do you think, Fenny? Are we ready for some questions from the audience?
Yeah. So I got the first questions here is, do you have any target audience? And yeah, do you?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say young people. Yeah, what I was just talking about, like for target audience, it's young people. And then, but I would also say I'm also very concerned with like how my elders perceive my work, right? Like how do the elders in my community perceive my work? I want to treat, that intention with as much care as I do young people, right? To kind of try to work in a way that's intergenerational and make work that's intergenerational. And so, yeah, I would say anyone, everyone, come one, come
Thank
on.
you.
Yeah.
And the second question is, have you ever been surprised by who has been impacted by your work?
Yes, I mean, always, every time, everyone, hearing about Amiko's daughter enjoying the book, it comes as a surprise to me. It's something that I don't take it lightly. It's not something that I ever want to get used to where it doesn't, touch my heart. And so everyone has so much stuff to look at. Everyone has a phone in their hands with an endless amount of images and narratives and media and everything. And so I'm grateful for anyone who's willing to just give a few minutes to read something or to look at something. And I think that I try to be mindful of that, right? Like I don't have any expectation that everyone's going to read anything that I do. So if someone just comes in and reads one page, like that's cool. That's fine with me. They can come in and just read that. But yeah, I mean, there's, I think one thing that does come to mind is, I really like when people have my work on their refrigerators. I like when people come and tell me that they got a drawing or a postcard, or they printed something out, or they tore something out of a magazine and they like put it up on the refrigerator or like on a bulletin board or something or whatever. I mean, like that's how I live my life, right? Like there's all these things that I'm interested in and things that have kind of touched me. And so it affects me. And I love that. I love hearing that, like, there's this little thing and someone looks at it when they go into the fridge to like make their food, that's nice to me. Like that to me is like as important as anything else, honestly. Yeah.
So Amiko, do you have any question with the Zeke?
I wonder, should we maybe circle back to the theme of return as we end here? I think like we were our group, we were reflecting on how the pandemic has upended the pre-COVID life ways, and also how that exposed the deep inequities and injustices of our system. Um, we were thinking about imagining and pushing towards transformation and how artists are doing this. And obviously, like we were wanting to speak to you about how you've been reflecting on this question and how we can strive towards something that we are imagining. And I think you've shared with us little nuggets so far, but I wonder if we could hear a little bit more about how you might respond to that.
Yeah. So I kind of intentionally did not prepare for this question or topic. But hearing just what you said and the last word that you said, I think is the thing that strikes me the most, which is imagining, right? Like, I think that we've had a somewhat of a collective experience. Obviously, we're experiencing this from many different places and many different levels of class and race and gender and sexuality, abilities, disabilities, these sorts of things, right? Like, so how, I'm ready to press forward. In some of the language that was sent to me about this topic that you all are discussing or addressing, I'm also not interested in returning to whatever normal was, right? I don't, think that that's a productive thing. I also think that the use of the word normal is just already problematic, right? Like, because one person's normal is another person's oppressed, right? So how do we be mindful of that as we move forward? And I think something that is very encouraging to me is, again, like the younger generation that has really met this moment and has really stepped forward, to be cognizant of these issues and understand these issues. And I think is really the driving force for causing some folks like me who are in an older generation, and even folks that are older than me, to act on them, right? To act on things, even if we've known about them, to take some sort of action. But I think, the imagination thing, I think is something that I return to, which is, we're given so many reasons to not visualize and envision what our futures can be. We're given every reason to not know what that is, or to not think about what that is. And I think that it's important to think about those things with intention, as much as it is important for us to acknowledge what we've experienced, right? Especially in these past couple of years. And I should mention that, for a lot of folks, it was really just becoming aware of these things that many folks have been experiencing for a lifetime. And so I think that, we're given a lot of reasons to not want to imagine. And my hope is, moving forward, is that we have a redistribution of power for who's doing the imagining, right? And whose imaginations we're acting on, which is what my hope is as we move forward.
Thank you for sharing those reflections, and just like your focus on like finding those intersectional spaces. For me, like your approach to the river story, and looking at how our rivers hold stories, and how you transcribe those experiences about a place, which I think is so hard to do, with particular like focus on what's been erased. Your ability to work with multiple languages and just finding those spaces for, I think maybe you even mentioned in between spaces as like a way to hold multiple truths. All those things are things that myself and my students, all of us, we appreciate so much. So thank you so much for this time. So
Yeah,
truly
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Feni. Thank you, Amico.
This has been such a treat, Zeke. I've got a couple of final follow-up questions.
Yes.
You're getting so much love on the chat. There's so much excitement about your work, and your work as an interdisciplinary storyteller and artist. And it's just cool to see everyone just throwing that love your way, and like your work has been so impactful. I know people are wanting to get more access to that, and so a couple of really important questions. Various options to purchase your books online. Is there a particular online retailer that puts the most money into your pocket? Is there a place that people can go to like really sort of get that directly back to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would, I'll just plug this again, right? lasemiafoodcenter.org. It can be read for free online. It's also pay what you can. And that money goes to their programming and supporting the important work that they're doing in the community. And then, I would say you can always go into a local bookstore and request a book. I would be, very concerned with, supporting kind of local community, local stores as much as possible. I can't point to like one spot where the money is going to like go in my pocket, but it's also, I don't think that it's at the forefront of my, intentions or whatever, but yeah, I would say that though, like, I think bookshop.org is where I've been ordering stuff, and it comes from like a local retailer. They also give back to retailers and stuff.
Great.
So that, I guess that's what I would plug there.
Love that. And then just one more, the English version, it looks like, of the new zine is out of stock on their website. And so we're wondering, which is a great problem.
Okay.
But I'm wondering, do you have any news on when that might be back in stock? I mean, they can contact the seller or whatever, but
yeah, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. That actually lines up with some messages that I've been getting. That makes sense now. I didn't realize this, so I apologize.
Oh no, it's all good.
I would say this, like, you can read it for free online. I know that it's always nice to have the actual thing, but I'll have to follow up with them. I'm actually very surprised to hear that. That's an excellent problem, but
absolutely wonderful problem to have. And I think, for me, at least when I'm reading the work, the tangible sort of feel of the paper and look of the colors and like everything is so different, and it's great to have it on the screen and to have the physical copy. And so I know I'm definitely in that crew of just like desperately wanting it. So.
For sure. I mean, me too, as you can obviously, tell behind me. I'm definitely in that camp too. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Zeke. This is like awesome. And